So welcome to this very first actual development lesson. In this lesson, we are going to start a new project, set our emulator and simulator for both iOS and Android, and make sure that everything in our project is working properly. I'm going to go ahead to my Visual Studio community. You could either use Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio. They work exactly identically for what we are trying to do. So once you go to your studio, you want to go ahead and start a new project or a new solution. So I'm going to start a new solution. And this new solution is going to be a multi-platform solution of the type native development. Keep in mind that Xamarin offers a way to develop Xamarin Forms, which is a responsive model of developing applications for 3 different platforms, iOS, Android, and Windows, as well as it offers a way to develop applications natively, which is the way that we are going to do it in this development. So I'm going to choose native. I'm going to choose blank native application that doesn't have anything in it essentially. And I'm going to say next. In here, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this application groceries. So that's my groceries, and it's for iOS and Android, and is using shared library. This is actually quite important because some of the frameworks that we will be using later on in terms of our input output would only work with shared library and will not work with PCL. So make sure that you use the shared library for this. I'm going to say next, and I'm going to place it in somewhere that I know, in groceries. Open. Perfect. So now we have a new shared project in Xamarin, and I want to quickly explore the project. Once you go to your solution, and if you don't have that, you can go to View, Paths, look for Solution. We will have essentially 3 different areas. One is our groceries, which is the common area. And then we have the groceries Droid, which is our Android side. And we have groceries.ios, which is our iOS section of the whole development. So whenever we want to do things in terms of developing for iOS, we come to this section. Every time that we want to work on our Android project, we come in here, and the common stuff, we leave them in the groceries. Now, something to keep in mind is that by default, the application is trying to compile for iOS. You can simply change that by right-clicking on Android and saying set as a startup project. So whichever is a startup project, if you run the application, that one will get compiled. Now, before I do any actual compilation, I want to do a few quick tests. I want to make sure that some things are done the way I like them to be. I'm going to actually get rid of my application output for now. And this file, getting started, is actually not useful for us, so I can delete that. And this file, my class, essentially is a temporary class that shows us these are the common stuff in the namespace of groceries. So we don't need that either. So I'm going to remove that one too. So delete entirely. Perfect. So I'm going to go to iOS. And in the iOS, we have something called a storyboard. So I'm going to open that file. And if you're coming from a background of Xcode, in Xcode, you just do a single click. In Xamarin Studio or Visual Studio, you do a double click to open your different files. Once my file is open in a storyboard, we can see that its mode is set to generic. That means it works for any kind of device. That's not really what I want to do in this particular development. I want to set it to be iPhone 6. So for all purposes of this development, I will be using iPhone 6. You can simply change that to 6 Plus. And that really doesn't affect anything that we are doing. You just need to be aware of setting your constraints and keeping an eye on your layout. I won't be really going through those simply because this development as it is quite long. So I don't want to spend any time on the interface design matters. But those are actually quite simple to implement for you guys. So I set my development to iPhone 6. And of course, because of that, in my debug, I'm going to choose an iPhone 6 as well. You might have different kind of simulators. These are the ones that I have on my machine, and I'm using iPhone 6 iOS 11. We will be using iOS 11, but we are not really using anything from the latest version of the API. So you could essentially develop this for any version of iOS. Anything above version 5 or 6 would do this for you. But for throughout this development, I will be using iOS 11. So that's that. And then I'm going to run my application. Once my simulator boots up, I should be able to see this, which is essentially the default application that Xamarin provides. It has one button that I can click and it counts numbers, and that's all we want to do for now. We don't really want to do anything else for here. I wanted to make sure that my simulator is working properly, and that is working. Now that we have done that, let's move on to our Android side, and I want to do similarly the same thing. So I don't want to see the unit testing. I want to go to Android and I want to go to resources, to layout, and open main.axml. So main.axml is our designer file. This is the one that we use to do all of our interface design for our Android project. And similar to what we did for iOS, that we chose a specific device, iPhone 6, here we have seen that the device is actually Nexus 4, and I'm actually going to keep that. Nexus 4 is a very good, device to get started with. So with Nexus 4 in mind, I have to go up here and add a new emulator that works with Nexus 4, and that's quite important at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my simulation. I'm going to say, I actually accidentally moved this, sorry about that. So I'm going to right click on Groceries Droid and say set as a startup project. And now that it's set up, I can go ahead and say go to Google Emulators, and in Google Emulators I'm going to make a new emulator, or I'm just going to show you the settings that I have, because that's exactly what I need. What you want to have for your Google emulator is this. You want to have Nexus 4 as the device, so whatever we see in the interface design and in the emulator are the same, and you want to set it to API 24. This part is actually quite important, simply because we use some libraries throughout this development that would only work with level 24 and above. You can find other libraries that they are on the package store, that they work with lower levels of API, but the ones I've chosen to use in here, they work on 24 and above. So I'm going to set target to Android 7, API 24. I've got no skin, and I've set on the host GPU on, so it would be a little faster. So that's about that. So that's the emulator that we have. So let's run that and see how it works. It's certainly going to take it a little while before it deploys it to a device or the emulator, and then once my emulator boots up, we should be able to see something quite similar to what we saw in the iOS. There is one button that we click on it and we count 1 click, 2 click, 3 clicks, so on and so forth. Now, before I step out of here, I want to make sure that my development is happening for version 24 as well. And I will do that by going to Properties, Android Manifest. And the Android Manifest, I'm going to say the target Android version is 24. You could very well leave it at 26. That's simply because that is higher than 24, but I'm going to keep it to the lowest possible one. So 24, and you could actually change the minimum Android version to 24 as well. These are both in our Android manifest file in the properties. So with that, that's pretty much it. In this lesson, we managed to have our emulator on Android as well as the one on iOS. They both work. Both of our emulators, they do the very basic thing. We haven't really done anything in here, but we know that our application is working, and also we know that our simulators, they reflect exactly what we have in our interface designers. Let's keep it up to here, and then we come back to our next lesson where we begin designing our interfaces.